The metallic clang of my hammer echoed across the quiet cul-de-sac as the final cedar plank slid perfectly into place. The scent of fresh-cut wood mingled with the humid dusk air, thick with the buzzing of cicadas and the faint sweetness of honeysuckle drifting from my neighbor's garden. Sweat dripped down my back, soaking into my gray cotton t-shirt as I stepped back to admire the fence I'd spent the past 3 days building. 8 feet tall, solid, beautifully stained to match the trim of my single-story ranch home, it was my castle wall. And after years of feeling watched, judged, and harassed, it was exactly what I needed. I felt proud. I felt safe. But under that safety simmered a nervous tension because I knew any second now she would appear. And right on cue, her shrill voice cut through the thick summer air like a rusty saw blade. "What in God's name do you think you're doing, David?" I turned slowly, hammer still in hand, to see Karen marching down the sidewalk, her foam sandals flapping with every indignant step. Her pastel pink cardigan was buttoned all the way up despite the heat, and her chin-length blonde bob swung around her narrow face, flushed with rage. I didn't respond immediately. I let her approach, taking in her posture, rigid, arms folded so tightly across her chest her knuckles whitened. Her lips were already pulled into a sneer. She stopped at the edge of my lawn, refusing to step onto my property line, as if the grass itself would contaminate her. "I asked you a question," she snapped, her voice wobbling with fury. "Why is there a monstrosity surrounding your yard like some kind of prison fence? Did you get approval for this?" I wiped my brow with the back of my gloved hand and rested the hammer against my thigh. "Karen, it's a privacy fence. County code says I can build up to 8 feet along my boundary. It's all permitted." I checked twice. Her nostrils flared. "County code? County code." She spat the words as if they were poison. "This is an HOA community, David. County code means nothing here. You need architectural approval for any exterior modifications." I shrugged lightly. I submitted the request. The board didn't reply within the 30-day window, so per state HOA law, it's automatically approved. For a moment, Karen's mouth fell open, speechless. Then her eyes narrowed to 2 pale slits. "Don't you dare quote HOA statutes to me. I am the architectural chair. I decide what gets approved here. And I say this eyesore is coming down." My pulse quickened, a hot spark of anger flaring in my chest, but I forced my voice to remain calm. "I built it entirely within code and property lines. If you'd like, I can show you the permits and survey." She let out a bark of laughter, sharp and mocking. "Your little papers mean nothing. The board will be informed and you'll be fined daily until it's removed." With that, she turned sharply and marched back towards her house, her sandals slapping harder, echoing across the cul-de-sac as porch lights flickered on around us. I watched her retreat, gripping the hammer so tightly my knuckles ached. The sun finally dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across my yard. Fireflies blinked to life among the tall grass at the back fence, their glow soothing in the gathering darkness. But the calm wouldn't settle into me. My mind replayed her words, her threat. I'd moved to this quiet neighborhood for peace, for security after my divorce. For the first time in years, I was building something that was mine alone, and I refused to let her destroy it. Later that night, as I was brushing my teeth, the bathroom window cracked open to the backyard. I heard a faint rustle of gravel. I froze, toothbrush still in my mouth, ears straining. Another crunch, deliberate and slow. My heart began pounding as I moved quietly to the window and peered out into the darkness. A single bobbing light cut through the night, illuminating my fence in flashes. Karen stood just beyond the property line with a flashlight, phone in her other hand, filming every inch of the new construction. Her cardigan had been replaced by a long blue nightgown that billowed slightly in the evening breeze. She moved like a predator marking territory, scanning up and down the boards as if searching for a flaw to sink her teeth into. Anger boiled in my chest. I flicked on the back floodlights and in an instant my yard lit up like a stadium. Karen jumped, the phone jerking sideways as she raised a hand to shield her eyes. Even from behind the glass, I could see her face twist with rage at being exposed. "Can I help you, Karen?" I called out, my voice echoing off the cedar planks. She lowered her hand slowly. "I'm just gathering evidence," she said in a shrill, brittle tone. "You'll be hearing from the HOA tomorrow morning." She turned without another word and stomped back across the gravel path, her flashlight beams slicing wildly through the darkness ahead of her. I stood there, toothbrush still in hand, heart racing with adrenaline and disgust. "Evidence," she'd said, as if I were a criminal for wanting privacy in my own home. The next morning, I woke up to the familiar buzz of my phone alarm and rolled out of bed, back muscles aching from the days of construction. The scent of fresh lumber still lingered in the hallway as I padded toward the kitchen, ready for coffee and a quiet morning to plan my work calls. But as I approached the front door to grab the paper, a flash of blue and red strobed through the frosted glass. I froze. Sirens. Right outside my house. My stomach dropped as I moved to the window and pulled back the curtain. 2 patrol cars sat in my driveway, engines idling. An officer in dark sunglasses stood at my front steps, hand poised to knock again. Behind him, near the mailbox, stood Karen, arms folded across her chest, lips curved in a triumphant smirk. A heavy fist knocked again, echoing through my chest. I swallowed down the panic and opened the door. "Morning, sir," the officer said, his voice professional but cold. "We need you to come outside and speak with us." Karen's smirk widened into a full smile as I stepped onto the porch. The humid morning air clung to my skin like sweat as I closed the door behind me, my mind spinning with confusion and anger. "What's this about, officer?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. He adjusted his sunglasses, looking down at his clipboard. "We received a report from the HOA that you're constructing a structure that's illegally blocking community land access. We're going to need to inspect your property lines." Karen let out a little laugh under her breath, her eyes bright with vindictive delight. I glanced at her and then back at the officer, rage bubbling up hot and acidic in my chest. This was her plan all along, to escalate it until I broke. But I wasn't going to break. Not today. Not ever. I walked down the front steps slowly, feeling the rough concrete beneath my bare feet. The humid morning pressed heavy against my skin, carrying the scent of freshly cut grass from the neighbor's yard. Karen watched me with eyes glittering like shards of broken glass, her arms folded tightly across her chest. She stood perfectly still, as if carved from marble, radiating smug satisfaction. The officer gestured to the fence. "We need to inspect the structure, sir. Ms. Holloway here has filed a complaint stating that it extends onto community land and violates neighborhood standards." I clenched my jaw to keep from barking out a bitter laugh. Of course she'd file it under her formal name. "Officer, the fence is entirely on my property. I have the permits and the survey in my office. If you'll let me grab them." Karen interrupted, voice sharp as glass. "Forged documents don't count. He's been warned multiple times. He's building a barricade to block emergency access. It's a public safety issue." "That's a lie," I snapped before I could stop myself. Heat rose up my neck as the officer narrowed his eyes at me. I took a deep breath and forced calm back into my voice. "There's no public access through my yard. It's private land. My survey markers are still in place if you want to see them." The officer looked from me to Karen, then back again, his face unreadable. Finally he sighed. "Let's take a look at those markers." I led them along the side path lined with small solar lights, still glowing faintly in the dawn shadows. Dew clung to the grass and soaked the hem of my pajama pants as I walked. Karen followed behind us, her sandals crunching on the gravel path, each step echoing like a ticking clock inside my head. We stopped at the first boundary stake, a bright orange cap peeking through the trimmed grass beside the fence post. I pointed to it, heart pounding so hard I felt slightly dizzy. "That's the north corner. The fence is 5 inches inside the line. You can see the surveyor's flag still tied around it." The officer crouched down, examining the marker, then stood and moved along the fence, inspecting each post, each line, each angle. Karen hovered near him, arms folded, glaring daggers at my back. Her breath came out in short, furious bursts, and I could almost hear the gears grinding in her head, desperate to find something, anything, that would back up her lies. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the officer straightened and turned to face us. "Everything appears within property boundaries. As far as I can see, there's no encroachment on community land." Karen's face twisted. "What about the aesthetic violations? The fence is an eyesore. It destroys neighborhood cohesion and lowers property values. He didn't get proper architectural approval." The officer shook his head slowly. "That's an HOA matter, ma'am, not a police matter. If you want it removed for aesthetic reasons, you'll need to pursue it through civil avenues." I could see her jaw clenching tighter with each word, her eyes narrowing to slits as her face darkened with rage. For a moment I thought she might scream at him, or at me, or at the universe itself for daring to defy her will. Instead she smiled. It was a small smile, tight and cold, curling only at the corners of her thin lips. "Oh, don't worry," she said softly, her voice low and vibrating with malicious delight. "We'll handle it. The fines are already being processed. You'll be bankrupt before you can blink." She turned and stalked away down the path, sandals slapping hard against the gravel, leaving the officer and me standing in the damp morning silence. I watched her go, while burning in my throat. The officer gave me a small nod, almost apologetic, before walking back to his cruiser. When they were both gone, I walked back into my house, feet leaving damp prints across the hardwood floor. I felt like the air had been sucked from my lungs. My hands trembled slightly as I reached for my phone on the kitchen counter and saw 2 new emails. Both were from the HOA. The first was a formal violation notice for unauthorized exterior modification affecting neighborhood aesthetics. The second listed the fines: $500 per day until the fence was removed. I stared at the glowing screen, rage pulsing behind my eyes. I thought about the months I spent planning the fence, the late nights reading through county code, the savings I'd poured into cedar planks and concrete posts, the sweat and pain of hauling lumber alone under the beating sun. All of it threatened by a woman who saw herself as a queen ruling a kingdom of manicured lawns and pastel mailboxes. The rest of the day passed in a blur of anger and helplessness. Calls to the county code office confirmed my fence was entirely legal. Calls to the HOA went unanswered. That evening, I sat on the porch steps with my elbows resting on my knees, staring at the fence in the fading golden light. The boards cast long shadows across the grass, each one a silent sentinel guarding my solitude. But it wasn't enough. Not against someone like her. As darkness fell, my phone buzzed with a notification. I opened Facebook to see Karen's post blazing at the top of the neighborhood group. Attention! Dangerous resident building illegal barricade to defy HOA standards. This behavior threatens property values and community safety. The board will be taking immediate action. Below her words were photos of me building the fence, my face twisted in concentration, arms flexed with effort as I hammered each board into place. In another, I was bent over mixing cement for the post. She had taken them without my knowledge, and now they were blasted out for the entire community to see. My stomach twisted as I scrolled through the comments. This is disgusting. What's wrong with him? He's always been creepy. I knew he was trouble. The rage that burned in my chest earlier that day turned to cold, simmering fury. My eyes stung with exhaustion, but my mind burned with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. Logical confrontation wouldn't work against Karen. She was too good at twisting truth into weapon, too protected behind her title, too beloved by the neighborhood she manipulated so easily. I set the phone down and stared into the dark yard beyond the porch lights, fireflies blinking softly in the shadows. My fence stood strong and silent, but I needed more than walls. I needed a strategy. Karen thought she could crush me under her rules. She thought she'd already won. But tomorrow I would find her weakness. And when I did, I would tear down her entire kingdom board by board. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Karen's smug smile, heard the echo of her sandals slapping away down my gravel path. When dawn broke, I sat at the kitchen table, coffee steaming in my chipped mug, staring out at the fence through the sliding glass door. The board stood tall and defiant under the pale morning light, but inside, my chest felt hollow and raw. I opened my laptop and began researching. First, HOA bylaws. I reread every single clause about fences, property lines, exterior modifications, architectural approvals, penalties, appeals, and meeting procedures. I highlighted the rules Karen had cited in her threats, then searched deeper. Page after page, my mind sharpened with each line of text. My anger hardened into something cold and heavy: focus. After hours, my eyes burned from the screen glare, but I kept going. I shifted to county public records. Parcel maps. Property tax assessments. Archive building permits. Everything related to Karen Holloway's lot. Then I cross-checked it with HOA meeting minutes, available publicly through the neighborhood's website. That's when the cracks in her pristine empire began to show. Karen's house, with its magazine-perfect landscaping and oversized wraparound porch, had multiple unapproved modifications. The porch itself extended 3 feet beyond what the HOA allowed. The small storage shed behind her garage had been built without submission to the architectural committee. There was even an old county code violation from 7 years back when she installed an underground sprinkler system that drained into a public easement. The fine had been dismissed after community negotiation, but the record remained. I leaned back in my chair and exhaled, staring at her digital footprint on the screen. My chest buzzed with a cold, fierce anticipation. Her confidence was built on an illusion of perfection and power. All it would take was the right blow to shatter it. I printed every document I found. Permit violations, property line surveys, screenshots of county records. I organized them into a black presentation folder and tucked it under my arm as I left the house. The summer heat pressed down heavy on the quiet streets, cicadas buzzing in the distant trees. My fence cast its long protective shadow across the yard as I walked to my truck. Instead of turning toward the HOA office, I drove 2 streets over to a house with faded red shutters and an overgrown oak towering in the front yard. I knocked twice. The door swung open to reveal Marcus, mid-40s, stocky with deep smile lines around his eyes. He blinked at me, confused. "David? What's up?" I lifted the folder slightly. "You got a minute?" Inside, we sat at his dining table cluttered with Lego pieces and unpaid bills. He sipped coffee from a chipped mug identical to mine. As I laid out the documents in front of him, his eyes widened. "Holy hell," he breathed, flipping through photos of Karen's violations. "How'd you find all this?" "Public records. County archives. HOA minutes." He shook his head slowly, a bitter laugh escaping his lips. "You know, she fined me $800 last year for painting my shutters burgundy instead of approved colonial red." "Exactly," I said quietly. "She's bullied half the neighborhood into paying thousands in fines while she breaks the rules herself." Marcus stared at me for a long moment, then leaned back and nodded. "What's your plan?" "We're not the only ones she's harassed. I've seen her Facebook posts about others. If I can get a few more people to stand with us, we take this to the board. She'll have no defense." Marcus chuckled darkly. "You want a list? Start with the Robinsons across the street, then John next to her. She tried fining him for weed overgrowth when his mower broke down. That afternoon, word spread like wildfire. I spent hours knocking on doors, sitting on faded couches, sipping lukewarm coffee while listening to neighbors vent years of pent-up frustration. By evening, 8 households agreed to show up at the next HOA meeting. Each had been threatened, fined, or humiliated by Karen over trivial violations, while her own porch extension remained blissfully unapproved. That night, I felt a quiet calm settle over me. My fence stood strong outside, but now so did I. The following Thursday, I walked into the HOA clubhouse with my presentation folder tucked under my arm. The room smelled of burnt coffee and lemon floor polish. Fluorescent lights flickered overhead, casting pale shadows across the foldable tables arranged in neat rows. Karen stood near the front, chatting with 2 board members. Her pastel cardigan was replaced with a cream silk blouse and black slacks. Her hair gleamed under the lights, perfectly coiffed into place. When she saw me, her lips twitched into a smirk. She turned back to the board members, gesturing at me with a small flick of her manicured fingers, whispering something that made them chuckle. I ignored her and took a seat in the second row. One by one, Marcus and the others filed in, nodding to me with tight, determined expressions. The meeting began with budget updates and landscaping reports. My leg bounced under the table, heart hammering in my chest as I waited for the agenda item. Finally, Karen cleared her throat and stood at the podium. "We have a serious violation to address tonight," she began, her voice dripping with righteous indignation. "Mr. David Carter has built an unapproved structure that violates our neighborhood's aesthetic standards and—" "Point of order," I said calmly, standing from my seat. Her eyes flicked to me, narrowing in irritation. "You'll have your time to speak." I walked down the aisle and stood before the board table, flipping open my folder. I spoke clearly, each word slicing through the heavy air of the room. "I have here public records showing that Ms. Holloway's porch extension exceeds HOA regulations by 3 feet. Her shed was built without an architectural submission, and her sprinkler drainage system previously violated county code. I also have statements from 8 other residents who have been fined or threatened by her for infractions far less serious than her own." The room fell silent except for the distant hum of the air conditioning vent. Karen's face went slack, her mouth opening and closing soundlessly like a beached fish. One of the board members reached for the papers, flipping through them with a deep frown. "Additionally," I continued, my voice steady despite the pounding in my chest, "I have documented evidence of Ms. Holloway using social media to harass and defame residents, calling them dangerous, incompetent, and unfit to live here." Marcus stepped forward from his seat, clearing his throat. "And we're tired of it. She's abused her power for long enough." The silence stretched on, vibrating with tension. Karen's lips trembled as she tried to speak, but no words came out. Her hands shook as she reached for her phone, scrolling rapidly as if searching for an escape clause to claw her way out. Finally, the board president, a stoic older man with heavy jowls and deep-set eyes, cleared his throat. "Thank you, Mr. Carter. We'll address this matter immediately." I nodded and stepped back. Karen's gaze followed me like daggers, her eyes bright with pure, impotent fury. As I sat back down, Marcus leaned over and whispered, "That was beautiful." Would come knocking. But inside, I knew it wasn't over yet. Her kingdom was beginning to crack, but I needed to bring the whole rotten palace down. Because tomorrow the real consequences. I woke before dawn the next morning, adrenaline already coursing through my veins. The memory of Karen's face last night, pale and trembling as the board flipped through page after page of her violations, filled me with a sense of fierce anticipation. Outside, the world was still dark and silent, broken only by the distant rumble of early commuters on the highway. My coffee tasted richer than it had in months. As I drank, I stared at my fence through the sliding glass door, its cedar boards glowing faintly under the porch light like sentinels in the gloom. Around 8, my phone buzzed. It was Marcus. "She's losing it," he said, his voice low and thick with amusement. "She's already been outside yelling at John about his trash cans being too close to the curb." I smiled, a slow, grim smile that spread warmth through my chest. Today's the day it all comes down. By noon, the sun was high and hot, beating down on the cul-de-sac as cicadas screamed from the oak trees. I heard the commotion before I saw it. Stepping out onto my porch, coffee cup in hand, I watched as 2 county code enforcement trucks pulled up in front of Karen's house. 3 uniformed officers stepped out, clipboards in hand, their reflective vests bright against the asphalt. Karen burst out of her front door in a flurry of frantic energy, her hair unstyled for once, curling wildly around her red, sweating face. She wore a faded purple house dress, the kind I'd only seen her wear when watering her back flower beds at dawn. Her composure was gone, stripped away like cheap wallpaper under a power washer. "What is this?" she screeched, her voice cracking. "Why are you here?" "I'm the HOA president, you can't just." One officer held up a hand calmly, flipping open his clipboard. "Ma'am, we're here to inspect reports of unapproved structural modifications and potential drainage violations on your property." Her eyes flicked past him and locked onto me. I raised my cup in a silent toast, the steam curling lazily between us. "You," she screamed, pointing at me with a trembling finger. "This is your doing. You think you've won? You think this ends with some pathetic inspection?" Ignoring her, the officers walked around her house, examining the porch extension with measuring tapes, taking photos of her back shed, checking her drainage outflow into the easement. Karen trailed behind them, her protests growing weaker and more desperate with each passing minute. Neighbors began to gather on the sidewalks, drawn out by the noise and the county vehicles. Marcus stood beside me, arms crossed over his chest, a wide grin on his face. Beside him, John laughed softly under his breath. "This is better than Netflix," he murmured. I watched Karen pacing back and forth, her movements jerky and uncoordinated. Her hands fluttered uselessly at her sides, her voice rising into hysterical shrieks that echoed off the parked cars and stucco walls. When the officers finally finished, they handed her a thick stack of violation notices. "Ma'am," one said firmly, "you are required to remove the unapproved porch extension within 30 days or face daily fines. The shed must be reviewed and permitted within 2 weeks. And your drainage system will need immediate correction to comply with county code." Her mouth moved silently for a moment before she finally rasped out, I can't. This is my home. I'm the HOA president." The officer merely nodded, professional and unmoved. "That may be so, but county code applies to everyone." She turned then slowly to look at me. Tears welled in her eyes, streaking black mascara down her cheeks in thin, ragged lines. The anger in her gaze was still there, but it was weaker now, thinned out by fear and humiliation. "This isn't over," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I'll find a way to destroy you." I met her gaze evenly, feeling nothing but a quiet, satisfied calm. "You already destroyed yourself, Karen." Neighbors murmured among themselves, shaking their heads as they drifted back to their houses. The street felt different then, as if some dark, choking fog had lifted. The tension that had sat heavy over the cul-de-sac for years seemed to drift away with the midday breeze. Later that evening, the HOA board sent out an emergency email to all residents announcing Karen's removal as president, effective immediately. Her leadership was under review pending further legal investigation. Marcus forwarded me the email with a string of laughing emojis. I walked outside just before sunset, the air cooling, crickets beginning their quiet chorus among the grass. My fence glowed golden in the low light. I pulled out a brand new brass padlock and clicked it onto the gate latch, sealing it shut with a finality that felt almost holy. As I stood there, I heard a soft sniffle. Turning, I saw Karen standing on her porch, arms hanging limp at her sides. Her house looked smaller now, stripped of its aura of power and intimidation. Even from across the street, I could see the way her shoulders curled inward, her eyes red-rimmed and hollow. She opened her mouth to say something, but no words came out. I simply gave her a small, polite nod, then turned and walked back toward my house, feeling the cool grass under my feet, the air clean and free around me for the first time in years. That night, as I sat on the porch drinking coffee under the stars, my phone buzzed with a notification. Someone had posted a video to the neighborhood Facebook group. I opened it to see shaky footage of Karen screaming at the county officers, mascara streaked down her face, her words incoherent with rage. The caption read, HOA Karen tries to ruin neighbor's fence, ends up getting her own house demolished by county code. The comments were filled with laughing emojis, shocked reactions, and jokes about buying popcorn for the next meeting. For the first time in a long time, I let myself laugh out loud, a deep, cathartic sound that echoed across my dark yard. I leaned back in my chair, staring up at the velvet sky sprinkled with silent stars. The crickets sang in the grass. My fence stood strong, tall, and proud around me, glowing silver in the moonlight. It turned out my fence hadn't just kept out nosy neighbors. It had kept out tyranny. And with every quiet breeze rustling through its cedar boards, it whispered back to me a promise I'd almost forgotten I needed. You're safe here. You're home.